This is Antic, the Atari Days podcast.
Literally, I mean, a day or two difference could have made, gosh, my goodness, what a huge difference in my life if I had gone into that store a couple of days earlier. He just said, I'll give you $1,500 a month to live on for 2 months, and if you haven't finished a game in 2 months, you won't make it in this industry anyway. The general public opinion was, oh, this is just more Jawbreaker, but I still kind of have a fondness for it.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. John Harris created the games Frogger, Jawbreaker, and Mouskattack for the Atari 8-Bit computers. He worked at Sierra Online and later Synapse Software. He later created video character generator systems based on the Atari machines. This interview took place June 10th, 2016.
The short prehistory of how I realized I was a geek was I kind of disassembled all of the household appliances and equipment, trying to figure out how things worked. And my father, after some of these things I couldn't put back together again, so just to kind of save his own sanity, he started buying me Heath kits, and that gave me the chance to experiment with things that didn't break the family equipment. And so that was really cool. And when I first got into school, I was actually planning to go into electronics engineering. I wanted to be able to make stuff and build stuff. I was always curious about how things worked. And I was signed up at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. I had an apartment. I had a job. Everything was all set. And I went to a West Coast computer fair. I had recently gotten my Atari 800 and had started to get into programming, was really enjoying it. And they had kind of a sign there from Online Systems looking for programmers, and talked to them for a while, and he showed some pictures of the area that he was in, and it sounded really, really interesting. And for some bizarre reason that I almost can't even remember, I decided to go up there instead of going to San Luis Obispo and going to school.
Wow.
And that's really how things got started.
Cool. All right, so I want to go pause here for a minute. Tell me how you found the Atari 800. It sounds like you already knew how to program by this point. So did you teach yourself, and what were you kind of tell me about that journey?
Yeah, I got exposed to the mainframe computers in probably high school, although possibly junior high school. We had the old teletype machines with the paper tape readers and all of that. And at first it was just playing games. And there was one particular day where I saw somebody playing a game that I was familiar with. I think it was the old Star Trek game with the quadrants and Klingons and all that. And something happened that was different from normal. And I looked at that and I went, how did that happen? And he says, "Oh, I changed the code." And that was just like a completely foreign concept. I mean, I had no idea at that point that computers were something that you could alter. And so that was like one of those light bulb moments where I talked to him about it and, questioned him about how do you do that and how'd you figure it out. And so he showed me little bits of basic programming. And so I started doing some of the modifications of programs myself. And then shortly after that, the Commodore PET came out, and a friend of mine had gotten one, and so I started playing with the Commodore PET, and I wound up writing one of those Star Trek style games in BASIC on the PET, and was really having a lot of fun with that. And so I went ahead, and when I scraped the money together, another friend had gotten an Apple II, and kind of played with that one for a while, but really didn't care for it just because of all the things it was missing. It didn't have like the full screen editing, and didn't have some of the operating system features and some of the things that I was used to on the PET that I thought made it made it fun to work with. And so I had decided I would go buy a Commodore PET. I kind of liked the graphics and color and all of this on the Apple, but it just wasn't as fun of a machine to me. So went into a computer store literally to buy a Commodore PET, and they had gotten the Atari 800 either that day or the day before. Nobody knew how to do anything with it. There weren't any cartridges for it except for the basic cartridge and I think the educational, cassette tape educational system. I think that was it. Didn't have any games, didn't have anything else to show for it. But I turned it on and I played with it, and it didn't take very long to find out that it had the same full screen editing that the PET did, even more so. Had the same color graphics that the Apple did, and so to me it looked like the best of both worlds. And so I bought an Atari 800 that day. So literally, a day or two difference could have made, gosh, my goodness, what a huge difference in my life if I had gone into that store a couple of days earlier.
Wow, you could have ended up with a PET. It would have been terrible. Your life would have been terrible.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. All right. So
talk about being in the right place at the right time. It just sometimes it happens.
Right. So you took it home, and did you teach yourself assembly language before you got to online systems, or were you still dabbling in BASIC?
Yeah, I had. Let's see. The assembly language story starts with one of the S100 bus computers that yet another friend had, and the MSI machine, if I remember, and that was front panel switches and LED lights, and that's all you had. And I remember doing kind of the high-low game. You guess a number, and it tells you if you're too high or too low. I wrote that on the MSI, on the front panel switches, just kind of like, I literally composed that in real time, which was really cool, like pre-calculating branch offsets and all that kind of stuff. I look back on that, and that just seems really, really crazy. But I had, figured out enough to be able to get little things like that done. And it was a curiosity more so than anything. I didn't realize you could do great things with it. That was the only way to program that particular MSI machine, and so it was kind of a fun exercise to start with. But let's see, I'm trying to remember how I got into assembly language on the Atari, because it was initially really, really hard to do. There weren't any assemblers. There weren't any ways to get into it. I remember the guy with the Apple. It was like really easy to pop into the machine language monitor. If BASIC crashes, you wind up in the machine language monitor, and so I wrote a BASIC program that all it would do would crash, and the Atari did was freeze up and die. It didn't go into the machine language monitor like I expected it to. But it seems like somebody eventually made an assembler that you loaded into BASIC from cassette, and it would just like compile your program into a string and stick it in BASIC and execute it, something strange like that. And but it was enough to play with. There was a disassembler that I could disassemble some of Atari's cartridges. I remember one of the big draws back then was all of the documentation for the machine, all the publicity and everything. They said that the machine was capable of 4 colors. And you look at Atari's game cartridges and you start to count the colors, and it didn't take very long to get more than 4. Right. And so someone was lying, and I remember having to find out why, and why do they say we only have 4 colors? Where are those other colors, and how do you get to them? And so there was a group of about 3 of us. We didn't all have Ataris. We had different machines. We were all curious about the question and the mystery, and disassembled as many programs as we could find, and just kind of poked around at various memory locations trying to find out what things did what, and it took quite a while. And then of course there was information coming out. Oh boy, what was that early? Ah, shoot, sorry, don't remember. But there were little tidbits of information that would come out from some of the magazines, and it was a really fun exploratory period trying to figure out how things worked.
Nice. All right, so you're at the West Coast Computer Fair, and you run into the folks from Online Systems, and they were recruiting at that point?
They were recruiting, yeah. They were trying to find as many game developers as they could.
Mm-hmm. And had you written stuff on your own besides, guess the number of games that you could show them?
Yeah, a couple of things in BASIC. I mean, I didn't have anything there to show them. There was a tank game and kind of a space war style combat game, and a couple of other things that I did in BASIC. Nothing really spectacular, like redefined character sets and that kind of thing. But he basically said that he would, he'd give, he had a place to live, so I was sharing a house with other programmers.
We're saying we're talking about Ken Williams, I'm assuming?
Ken Williams, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. And he just said, I'll give you $1,500 a month to live on for 2 months, and if you haven't finished a game in 2 months, you won't make it in this industry anyway. And so that's that's kind of the way things went. And I had in that first month or so, I wrote the Pac-Man game, the kind of the precursor to Jawbreaker. That was back when I didn't know what copyrights were. I mean, it seemed like everybody else was copying arcade games, and you had a built-in game mechanic that was already tested, and people knew it. It was fun. It was kind of a guarantee. Well, I know this will work kind of thing. And so I wrote that game, and Online Systems was already selling Gobbler for the Apple. So I took that in when it was finished, and he liked it, but he said, unfortunately, I can't sell it because it looks too much like Pac-Man, and let me know that Atari had recently contacted them and told them that was off limits. And so he said, you're going to have to disguise this if we want to sell it. So I brought it back in the next day and had added mustaches and sunglasses to all the characters, which got a chuckle, but obviously wasn't exactly what they wanted. For those that know Mouskattack, that's another story we can get into maybe a little bit later.
All right.
But it has characters that look a lot like ghosts, but they have sunglasses and mustaches on them. Those were my Pac-Man ghosts from the disguised game. So but then we went from there to the redesign of Jawbreaker, with a different theme and everything, and that got us around the copyright issues.
So, okay, I'm curious, when you got there the first day, like, hi, welcome, here's your bed, here's your computer. Did they give you any direction on what game to make? Because it seems like if they had, you wouldn't have come with a straight-out Pac-Man clone. Or did they just say, see what you can do, good luck?
They said, see what you can do, good luck. Yeah, I think part of what they were interested in was kind of what are you going to come up with on your own. I think that may have been part of the evaluation, looking for not necessarily just programmers, but people who could just go out and make a game starting from nothing.
Sure. So talk to me a little bit about that environment of just being in, it sounds like a house filled with programmers 24/7. That seems like an interesting environment to work in, to live in.
It was really great because everybody was self-motivated, everybody was creative. turned out we all played golf, and we lived the house that we lived in was almost right next to a golf course, and the course gave us a family membership deal, even though we we were unrelated, but we were living in the same house. So they said, sure, why not? And so we played probably, I don't know, a few times a week, including in the snow. That was loads of fun with orange golf balls, and if we had chains, it would have been fun to chain up a golf cart, but I didn't have that. And I don't think we found any balls. We just, we brought beer, and of course all of us were underage, but that didn't seem to matter either. And I had loads of fun. We played, 3 or 4 holes until we ran out of balls, and and went home. But yeah, it was.
Nice.
I think the environment was always geared towards fun. Ken Williams would take us to arcades right at Office of Research and Development. We played a lot, we laughed a lot, joked a lot, and again, everybody was on the same page. We were all of the same mindset, all creative, and that makes for some great energy together.
Nice. Okay, so Pac-Man with glasses isn't going to work, and so we all know that turned into Jawbreaker. But at that point, how did it turn into Jawbreaker? Did you come up with the changes? Was it suggested to you? Was it a collaboration?
As I remember, it was kind of a collaboration. We just kind of all talked about, brainstormed ideas after. It was probably even the same day as I brought in the mustache game. And as far as whose idea they ultimately were, I honestly can't remember. Yeah. But eventually we came up with the candy theme, and that's. I know I came up with the toothbrush. I thought that was really fun after clearing the screen of candy, and everybody loved that. It actually gave us the opportunity to do considerably more animation than the Pac-Man game had. Sure. And I think that was one of the other driving factors for what we wanted to do. We wanted to make something that looked really cool too.
Nice. So had that become, when you finished Jawbreaker, did you launch right into your next thing, or had that become a hit before you started program number 2? What was program number 2?
Oh, that's a great question, and unfortunately, I don't entirely remember the chronology. I know that we got sued by Atari fairly early in the process, and I think that must have been before I had even started another game. Because one of the first things that we experimented with, we didn't know whether we were going to win that lawsuit or not, and so we did a number of experiments on what can we do to still have a game out there and still take advantage of everything that we'd written so far. I know I did one game that I don't know if you remember the game Head On, that was driving cars around kind of a rectangular grid, and you had different lanes and you had little dots that you could run over. There was an enemy car that would try to run into you. You'd change lanes one way and he'd change lanes and try to catch you. It was a game that was before Pac-Man, and it wound up being something that was part of our legal defense, that Pac-Man's ideas about going through a maze eating dots were not really original, that there was this other game. And so I made a version of Jawbreaker that was really for a kind of a trial aid to show a hybrid that was between Head-On and Pac-Man, as opposed to, of course, Atari's position was that I started with Pac-Man and made Jawbreaker that's almost the same thing and therefore infringed. And so we were trying to show a game that was kind of that could have come between Head-On and Pac-Man. And that game wound up accidentally getting copied over the masters and released as an update to the game.
Wow.
It was really, really odd, and I'm not sure how that happened, but it got a lot of negative comments because it wasn't designed to be playable, and so the ghosts would tend to come out of their starting point, and they just kind of wander around in circles in the middle because it wasn't so much a maze that they could make their decisions and go through. You had all these rectangular paths, and they just get stuck in them.
It's a demo, not meant to be a released product. Sounds like
exactly. But somebody saw it, and it had both vertical and horizontal tunnels, and somebody went, "Oh, this looks really cool. This is something that's better. He's made an updated version." And it was interesting that the process of releasing games was so casual back then that things like that could happen. But quite literally, the process of releasing a game at Online Systems was you walk into the company with a disc, and they make 4 or 5 copies of that disc and hand it out to different people. They play it. Somebody goes, "Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I like it too," and they would ship it. And that was essentially it. And so I guess when somebody saw this one, they thought it was an upgrade, and there wasn't a whole lot of communication and not a lot of process in place yet at that time, and so it got out. And then after that got out, I made a quick revision to change the maze, because the original maze was the Pac-Man maze. I mean, I hadn't bothered to change that. That kind of came back to bite us a little bit in the trial, because of course you look at it, and if you rotate the screen on its side, it's the exact same maze as Pac-Man. But ultimately, that wasn't part of what was protected by copyright, and so it didn't matter. But from Online standpoint, they kind of still wanted us to move away from Pac-Man a little bit, and so we made a third revision of the Jawbreaker game that it still had the horizontal vertical tunnels. But it just had an original maze design, and then that was the final version that was released. And so somewhere around here, where we didn't know if we were going to win the lawsuit or not, we just decided we had to make another maze game that was not Pac-Man and had completely different characters, and so we would still have that game. And so that's kind of where Mouskattack started from. It was another brainstorming session, and the VP of Online used to be a plumber, and so the documentation for Mouskattack, where it says "You are ace plumber Larry Bain." Larry Bain was the vice president of Online Systems. So that's where the laying pipe came in, and I actually really, really liked that game. I mean, it didn't have, graphics-wise, it didn't have all the flair. It wasn't polished. I think part of that was because we didn't know whether or not we would even need this. If it was designed to be a replacement for Jawbreaker, but then we won the lawsuits, and so Jawbreaker was able to stay on the market. And but a lot of people were playing it, especially in the 2-player mode. It's a really, really fun 2-player game. There's a lot of things that you can do strategy-wise that you can't do with the 1-player game because you don't have enough of the little cats, the ones that can control block the opponents. So we just we figured that we would release that as well, and it had kind of a cult following. There's a lot of people that figured out what it was and got into it and enjoyed it, and I got a lot of comments about it. But I also saw the general public opinion was, oh, this is just more Jawbreaker. There isn't really anything new here, and so it wasn't a big success, which was sad. But I still kind of have a fondness for it, just because it was the most. It was more fun to me than the Jawbreaker style game.
Was Frogger next?
And then Frogger was next,
Yeah.
and
finally a licensed game rather than something fresh, or rather than copying someone else's idea or coming up with something in a meeting. You had a licensed game. It sounds like.
Right. I think it was actually the first of the third-party licensed titles where a company went out and got the rights from someone else and licensed it. But I had approached that subject with Ken because I'd been playing Frogger in the arcade, and it was a perfect game for the Atari system. I mean, if you were to design a game that would show off what the Atari system was capable of doing, this is what it would look like. And so I knew I could make it look really nice and put tons and tons of colors. This was kind of my finishing touch to the Atari only has 4 colors argument. And now that I figured out how to do all the interrupts and color changes and everything, I wanted to really pump as many colors as I could. I think there's 58 or something like that.
Wow.
Which that was cool. It was the most at the time. Of course, eventually people got more than that, but it was fun to do, and it made a lot of sense from a popularity standpoint, and he was up for the idea, and from what I remember when he contacted, I guess it was Sega that he contacted to get the rights from, and initially there was kind of some questions because they had already licensed to Atari, but when everybody looked over the agreements and everything, it had something to do with being in ROM cartridges, and Atari had the rights to do. It was Parker Brothers that had the rights to do Frogger in cartridges, and I guess they made a 2600 game of Frogger, and then we had the rights to do Frogger on disc and cassette.
Oh,
so.
Cool. So you were getting royalties off of all these things, I assume. That seems
correct.
That seems like that probably did well for you, between Frogger and Jawbreaker and things like that.
Yeah, Frogger did really well. Frogger was at the peak that I knew, it was about $40,000 a month, which was quite a bit for a 19-year-old. So
yeah,
that was really great.
Nice. All right, and then what? Then what happened? I'm trying to see if there's any other games while you were there, or is that when you left the company?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that were kind of simultaneous. One of which was that there was a company called Synapse that did a lot of Atari stuff, a lot of original content, and I had wanted to. I thought all their stuff was really creative, and I liked that energy. I wanted to do more original, more creative stuff, and I also liked the fact that they loved the machine. I always felt like a second-class citizen at Online Systems because I was the only person with an Atari computer. When you go into the office, there was an Apple II on every desk, and all of the other programmers were Apple people, and at the time I was the only Atari person there, and so I kind of wanted to hang out with some more Atari people. I wanted to learn more too. That was one of the other things that was going on. I mean, I was still self-taught, but one of the one of the best ways to learn when you're self-taught is finding other people who are like-minded and share ideas and come up with stuff. And there wasn't anybody that I could really share ideas with. There wasn't anybody else that was exploring the Atari hardware, and I really wanted to do more exploration and figure out new techniques and all. And so I talked with the guys at Synapse, and they seemed really eager to do a project with me, and so I went ahead and agreed to do that. Well, at the time, I didn't have any concept of loyalty or not sure how to explain this. I hadn't determined to leave Sierra Online. I just wanted to do a program for Synapse, and I wanted to share with other developers, and I didn't even, the thought didn't even cross my mind that I was betraying somebody. But that's how it was perceived by Ken Williams and by Online. Mm-hmm. And I guess they got a lot of bad publicity from it. A lot of things were made about, what happened to John Harris? He left, Sierra Online, and so that started some bad blood between us that wasn't intended. I was too naive at the time to realize that would have company implications for his business, and so I felt bad about it. But the next thing that happened simultaneously, that this is the one that really killed everything. Parker Brothers had approached Online wanting to use our code for a cartridge version of Frogger for the Atari 400-800. And they had the rights to do it, and rather than start from scratch, they wanted to just take our code and do it. And they were willing to pay $200,000 for that. And so Ken approached me, and we talked about it a little bit, and since we'd be competing against our own product, essentially, he wanted to know if I could upgrade Frogger at all and make a 2-player version and some other things like that. And then he also said he was going to give me 20% of that $200,000, which was the royalty rate that I was getting off of Frogger. So I thought about that a little bit, and I thought, well, the reason that you get 80% of the Frogger money is that he's doing all of the marketing and distribution and has all these expenses and everything. This is a deal that kind of fell in his lap that he doesn't have to do anything for. And I thought it was unfair for him to take most of the money. And so I kind of said, well, this is, this all sounds good and we can do that, but the royalty rate doesn't seem fair if you're not doing any of the work. Why don't we swap it? And since this is more like a commission, why don't I give you 20%? And most of it, since most of the money is the code. Well, he just yelled at me and threw me out of his office. I mean, it was really not a good moment. And just thought I was some prima donna for wanting all the money. So I went back the next day and offered a 50-50 split, and I would give him the updated 2-player version within a month. And that was faster than the ROM lead time. There's no way Parker could get their product on the market. So I figured, we could get the publicity out that we have a new version, and kind of beat them to the market. It seemed like a 50-50 split was a fair split. And so that's what I offered. But his response to that was to give me nothing. He just basically took all $200,000. He said that he hired somebody else to program the 2-player version of Frogger. So basically, my royalty checks went from $40,000 a month to negative $20,000 overnight, because he claimed that He wrote to all his distributors and said, "We're doing a new version. Send back all your outdated stock, and we'll replace it with a new version." So I got hit with all the returns. I never did get any more money from Frogger after that point, and I didn't find out until probably 10 years, 15 years later that that version never materialized. The version from this other programmer, he just basically kept selling my game and not paying me for it. Which is got a lot of cojones. I don't know how. I guess that speaks to how naive I was, that he was able to pull that off, and I didn't find out about it.
Yeah.
But that's the way our relationship ended.
Wow. But meanwhile, you were building bridges at Synapse.
Yeah. So
I've interviewed Ihor, and he said that I believe that they had a similar situation where there was a house filled with programmers. So did you just move into the same sort of situation there?
No, I stayed in Oakhurst, and I had bought a house by then, and so I stayed there. I drove to Synapse every once in a while. I was even taking flying lessons because I thought maybe I'd fly out there if I was going to go on a regular basis. We had kind of a local airport close to us, and Actually, let me just stop there, and you can kind of give some more questions for what you're interested in.
No, I am just interested in the transition, and then once you got to Synapse, what you started working on there.
I started working on what eventually became Alley Cat, and it was kind of an incomplete design when I started, and I did a few screens and a little bit of interactivity and started to get things, but the game really wasn't coming together. And
was Bill Williams had been working on it before you got there?
No, he hadn't been yet.
Okay.
No, and it was just like it was a couple of pages of design notes, and then I was supposed to just basically run with it and turn it into a full game. And for whatever reason, I didn't get a good enough vision for that, and the artwork wasn't coming out as good as I would have liked, and the gameplay wasn't as good as I would like, and we were just kind of looking at it, and nobody, including myself, was really happy with where it was going. And around the same time, I'd been playing an arcade game called Bagman, and I think Ihor may have even asked if I knew of any licensed content, or I may have approached him with the possibility of licensed content. But anyway, this game came up, and there were a lot of new kind of technical side issues that I had started to discover by talking with people at Synapse and more of my own exploration. I had wanted to do a game that I could use some of these new techniques on, and this one kind of fit. And so we talked about that, and about how Alley Cat just didn't seem like it was really turning into something spectacular that we wanted. And so I went ahead and suggested this other idea, which we were calling Bankster at the time, and everybody liked it, and so we decided to do that instead. And Bill Williams took over Alley Cat, which, gosh, came out so much better than what I was doing. I was thrilled with what he was ultimately able to come up with.
It's an adorable game. It's really one of my favorites. So while we're talking about Bill, I mean, Bill is gone, and I can't interview him. So can you tell me a story about Bill Williams?
I think I only met him once, so I don't have.
Okay.
I don't have really any stories. Sorry about that.
All right. So you're working on Bankster / Bagman, and Let's see, what else? Tell me more Synapse stories while we're there. Looking at
So Bankster was, Bankster was coming along well, but I had basically picked 3 technical challenges and tried to do them all in the same game. And so it was running into a lot of difficulty just because I had players with interrupt colors, and I had backgrounds with interrupt colors, and as the players are scrolling through, all these interrupts have to kind of keep rewriting themselves on the fly. It was very, very fun, but it was also really, really difficult, especially since I was using the redefined characters, and every basically the top line of every character line, you have very, very, very few cycles. It's like, gosh, it's 16 or 20 cycles. I don't remember the exact number, but it's absolutely tiny. And so the colors would always screw up, as if everything lined up and you had to make too many color changes on that line and there wasn't enough CPU time to do it, then the graphics would glitch out. And so the technical challenges kind of nagged at me, kind of bogged the game down. And at the same time, there's all the litigation with online on 2 fronts. There was Midway came after us for the Jawbreaker stuff, even after we had already won the lawsuit with Atari, and then I wound up suing online over all the problems with Frogger. So there's a lot of distractions. Online was really turning into kind of a big business entity, and so a lot of the interactions were a lot less personal. I didn't have the friendly relationships I had before, so I lost a lot of that. I was living in my own house, so I didn't have
You said
the
online
friends that I
was
was living with before.
Did you mean Synapse was becoming more of a business entity?
No, online.
Okay.
Yeah, just because all the dealings with with Frogger and what I perceived as greed, and so kind of the end result of all of this, I was buried in technical challenges, buried in litigation, and not a lot of. I didn't have any support network. I was kind of all alone, and so I had what probably could best be described as a meltdown. I mean, I really struggled with personal issues, and decided I didn't want to be in that industry because it had turned so ugly. And so I never finished Bankster. Yet one more thing that I was really upset about. I eventually solved the technical issues a couple of years later, just kind of in my own time, because I wanted to get it done and get it done right. But it didn't get released as a game, and somebody else had been doing. I don't know if you're familiar with the term character generators. It was like the information display systems that you'd have in hotels or people's TVs.
Sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So you've got these chyrons that are $4,000, and you can basically create things that look drastically better on the couple $100, few $100 Atari XE computers at the time. And so somebody had started one of those projects, but had his own problems and got bogged down and wasn't able to finish it. And so he asked me if I wanted to finish that particular project for him. And I was, the time, once again, timing was interesting, and it was a way for me to do something different. And so I finished that project, and then for probably the next 5 or 6 years, I think, I was doing work related to character generators, either creating systems for that or doing implementations. I did like the arrival and departure screens for the airport in Maui, Hawaii, which that was really cool. They had an old dinosaur system that I guess they were paying a ton of money for a maintenance contract, and then the company just refused to honor it. So I got one of these panic calls that said, "How fast can you put something together that'll show our arrival and departures?" And I think I was on a plane a few days later with something that worked for them, and so I got a number of trips out to Hawaii. We did things for their cable systems and hotels and eventually one more airport. So that was like my distraction for the next, again, 6 years or so until I got tired of it because it wasn't creative. It wasn't all that. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't interesting.
Yeah. What was the name of this company that you were working with?
Infosoft.
Okay. I've seen a number of different Atari character generator systems, and I own a couple, and I was just wondering, which one. So, all right, so
I did the one for Cable Graphic Sciences and the ones for Infosoft.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I got homesick for games and for creativity, and Chris Iden, who was one of the very, very early online people also, he was still living in Oakhurst, and I was still living in Oakhurst. He had started another company at the time called Tachyon, and he had gotten a bid for a PlayStation 1 game, but nobody knew how to do PlayStation 1 there. So kind of begs the question of why did they accept the contract, but that's beside the point, I guess. Anyway, he called me up and just said, "Hey, I got this PlayStation 1 game, and nobody here really wants to do it. Wondered if you wanted to." So it was, again, this is just another one of these really bizarre timing instances where it came in, because he had when he first formed Tachyon, I think he had called, and I was still like right in the middle of all this character generator stuff, and I hadn't yet gotten to critical mass where I missed the gaming industry, and so I turned him down and said I was doing something else. But then when he called this time, it was right when I was feeling nostalgic and homesick, and I really wanted to do games again. So it worked out perfect. That game was it was an adventure game called Frankenstein Through the Eyes of the Monster, and it was a I guess the best description is horror show, because the company that originally did it, we found out later that they must have, it was a company that went out of business, and they must have known that they were going out of business because everything that they did was solely for the purpose of trying to get the next milestone payment. They had no intention of finishing the product. They knew they'd never finish the product. It did not have to work. All it had to do was give the illusion of working so that they could get the next milestone payment. So I take over this project. I've never written a single line of C code before, and it's all in C. I've never done anything with PlayStation 1 before. And of course I'm working with somebody else's code base. So it's like multiple learning curves all mixed together. The project's behind schedule, of course. And I'm supposed to get this thing back on track. And it was just this death spiral, because I'd find out something wasn't working, and I'd look at this and go, God, there's no way this will ever work. And so I'd have to rewrite that. And the problem is I eventually did that with virtually the entire product, because none of it was ever going to work. But I did it a piece at a time, and so every time I did a piece, it had to fit in with the rest of the quote-unquote non-working infrastructure that I didn't know at the time was also going to be non-working. So if I had just thrown everything away and started from scratch, I would have been way, way, way ahead. But I didn't know that at the time. So it was It was crazy. I was sleeping at the office, but eventually got it done, and I was happy with how it came out. They went and they sent it to Sony, and Sony rejected it and said, this isn't the kind of game we want on our platform. So all of that was absolutely for nothing.
Yikes.
Yeah.
All right, so I have a list here of what Atari Mania says is the software that you made for the Atari, and it's not always accurate, but I'm going to go down this list and you'll tell me if there's any stories or if it's just inaccurate. We've already determined you didn't do, another John Harris did Can't Quit for APX, so that's interesting. It says for West Coast Software, there's a game called Battle Warp.
Yeah, that was one of the basic games that I had done before online.
And then there's some stuff for Blythe Valley Software, Hansel and Gretel, and Briar Rose.
Yeah, I forgot all about those. Yeah, those were some educational products.
Let's see. It's something called Bomb Blaster, something called Chase. Those are the last two, I think.
Yeah, those were both basic games back in the Battle Warp genre. Those were those few games I had mentioned earlier.
Okay, nice, cool. All right, so now we're kind of getting to a more modern era in our tale. You're doing PlayStation 1 and things. So let's jump way ahead and tell me what do you do today?
Today I work for a group called Play-Doh, which is short for Play Together, and we're about a week away from a private beta release of kind of a suite of games that's mixed with chatting and messaging and social aspects. It's supposed to be kind of an entire network that's seamlessly integrated. And so, like, if you're chatting and somebody says, "Hey, you want to play a game of chess?" You can just say yes, and then you're just instantly in a chess game in less than a second with nothing else to download. And so I did a pool, as in billiards, game for them, which was really, really fascinating from the math standpoint. It's like, oh my gosh, how much of my old physics can I remember? And got into quaternions, which I'd never heard of before, four-dimensional algebra that just absolutely made my head explode. But it was fun to do. It came out great. It's coming out on the just on phones, Android and iOS. There may eventually be a browser version down the road, but for right now, it's a mobile app. And then I did Hold'em Poker, and next game I think is Gin Rummy. So, but that's current day.
Nice. Do you still own an Atari computer?
I actually have a version of the Channel Plus character generator system, which is built by somebody who was kind of a rabid Atari fan, and he licensed the Antic and GTIA and Pokey chips from Atari, and then just kind of made his own motherboard. And it's, oh my gosh, it is really nifty. It's got a 65816 processor, and more RAM and a hard drive and a real detached PC keyboard, and but otherwise it's the same graphics hardware. And so I love that. I still have it. I still work on my assembler every once in a while. I had made a version. There was an assembler called May, M-A-E, and I had heavily modified it over time, and eventually it turned into it had a built-in full-screen editor and a nifty debugger and all kinds of other stuff, and is smaller than the original one that I started with. So It was adapted to work with the 65/816 and the extra programming modes and all the extra memory. So that's probably the last thing I worked on Atari related was was that assembler, because a few people contacted me and they were, I guess a copy of it had showed up somewhere, probably from the stolen Frogger discs. That's probably where it got out, and so people were interested to see if if they could get more updated versions of it, and so I had talked with a number of people, feature requests, and so we worked on that for a while too.
Nice. What haven't I asked you about the Atari Days that I should have?
You probably know the telethon story where I mentioned the stolen Frogger disc, where the discs were stolen. You probably know that one, correct?
I don't. And anyway, please tell it if you would.
This was at the very end of development for Frogger, and there was kind of a how they used to have walkathons and bikeathons where you'd get sponsors, and somebody would agree to pay so much money for every mile you could walk and everything. Mm-hmm. Well, they were playing Jawbreaker and sponsored so much money for how many points they could score on Jawbreaker. And so I was this was down in Los Angeles, and I was kind of invited as a guest, since they were playing my game, and so I went down and I took Frogger down to show off, because I was going to get a little bit of television time and interview time, so I wanted to show off the new game. And so they had it was a successful gig, and they played it and had a lot of people there, and I had been talking to somebody about Frogger. I'd already shown it, and I had like all my discs in a like a binder, and it was the only two current copies of Frogger. I brought both of them just because I wanted to make sure if one didn't load, I had a backup. And pretty much my entire library, because that's where I kept my library. So all my tools, all my personal games, everything. And I had my back turned, but I was standing probably 3, 4 feet from it. And when I turned around, it was gone. And, looked briefly, investigated briefly, asked around. Nobody saw anybody took it. Nobody saw it. But ultimately, it wound up being the loss of not only a nearly completed Frogger, but almost everything else I owned also.
Wow! And
so that was like really, really depressing. I had like an older. I went back and searched through all my discs, and I found some stuff that had been on recycled discs, and it was old, but it was some of the game. And when I went to finish it up, I had a very difficult time separating the task of trying to recreate what I'd done before. I couldn't just write the game. I was always trying to go, gosh, what did I do here, and trying to recreate it. And so that kind of played havoc with my mind, and then at the same time I was fighting all the depression from losing everything. Every time I went to use a tool, I didn't have that tool, or I wanted to play a game and I didn't have that game anymore. And so it kind of it snowballed into, seems like it was a couple of months before I ultimately got that game finished. And I know that online took a lot of heat for that, because of course they had already paid for the ads. They had all the pre-orders. They were expecting it because it was essentially previously finished, and so this extra couple of month delay was a real problem. And I remember being interviewed by People magazine, and I told the story that I just told for you, what they wrote in the magazine was, I was almost done with Frogger when I just stopped. I couldn't finish it for anything. End of quote. And it made me furious that now I come off looking like, this flaky, insecure. Anyway, sorry. It just, there was a lot of things in interviews back then that were taken out of context, sensationalized, or the creative licenses. And
all right, well, since we're on that subject, let's talk about Hackers, the Stephen Levy's book, which you were profiled in it. On the whole, I don't know, just on the whole, thumbs up or thumbs down?
I loved the book. Absolutely loved it. It was so cool reading about things, hearing other people say things that I could see myself saying. And I think one of the things that resonated the closest was the people that described what it felt like to find out that there are actually other people like us out there. Because growing up, the one thing that almost all of us have in common is we get isolated. You're in school or in social groups or whatever, and you're different from everybody else, and labeled the nerd and the geek, and it's a very lonely lifestyle to start out with, and it makes you feel like there's no one else that's going through the same things you're going through. You're having to do all this alone. And so it was really cool seeing other stories from people that had gone through the same things. So all that said, and all the stuff that I liked, I was pretty upset at how the stuff with me was handled, because it's another story of Stephen spent a lot of time up in Oakhurst. I mean, a ton of time up in Oakhurst. And he knew everything that happened. And I don't know if he, chose not to write that because it wasn't as interesting, or if he didn't believe some of the things that I told him, or what. But the slant on some of my personality, let's say personality and relationship issues, was so far off the mark. It's just, it wasn't funny. It was sad, and I don't know why he did it, but it was a stumble. It was part of the stumbling block between Ken Williams and I, because I mentioned, the loneliness and all of this. I mean, I had wanted a relationship, but I had wanted somebody to be a really good friend, someone I could talk to and share experiences with, and someone that could help me when I was struggling. And I mean, all the things that you want a relationship for that I had not had. And Ken Williams heard that and goes, "Oh, he needs to get laid." Just totally not understanding. He thought that I was using like euphemisms for "I want to get laid." Okay, he was on this quest to find something for me that I didn't want, and we argued about it quite a few times, and I didn't understand why he didn't understand me. But for whatever reason, a lot of instances could have maybe developed into something, but Ken always sabotaged them, and it was a constant source of frustration, and it was something that we just never were able to resolve. Just one little quote in Ken's housewarming party at the new 10,000 square foot home that he built, and I still don't know if the invitation went out to me by accident or not. It says in Hackers that we crashed his party. We did get an invite for it, and like I said, that may have been a mistake. But the book goes on to say how, I brought my new fiance, dragging her, flaunting her large diamond engagement ring and everything. Her engagement ring, the largest stone on it is 8 points, less than a tenth of a carat, and it's a sapphire. Okay, it's something she designed, is what she wanted, and there are a couple of diamonds on it, but they're even smaller than that. And it's like, why do you have to even say things like that? Anyway, it's like I said, it was just frustrating how things were changed around.
I get it. Yeah. You made me think of it when you were talking about the People magazine thing. Seems like it wasn't not an isolated incident, really. But
no, almost all of them were that way. I mean, there were Forbes and money issues that concentrated only on money and completely inflated figures. So it's like I remember looking at this and going, Ken, this is what Forbes says I made. So where's the rest of it? And yeah, he didn't like that one either. So.
Do you think, I don't want to belabor this, but do you think that it was general ineptitude by writers and journalists, or do you think that it's just the world really didn't understand geeks and hackers and nerds yet?
I guess the short answer is I don't know. I haven't had a lot of contact with that world of writers and journalism, and so I don't know if it's common practice to use creative licenses to make stories sound more interesting. I don't know if they legitimately misunderstood. I just don't know.
All right, fair enough. If you could send a message to the Atari computer users who still exist and who are listening to this interview, what would you tell them?
I would say I'm absolutely thrilled that I was able to add some joy and fun and happiness into other people's lives. Something else from the Hackers book that really resonated was the desire to improve things, improve the world, make a difference. I don't know. I think fun is underrated. I think if you can make somebody happy and joyful, that's a terrific contribution, and I'm just delighted to be a part of that.
Awesome. I have what I need. Thank you, John.
All right. Well, that was a treat. Thanks so much.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.